Welcome everyone to the Biblical History Center's virtual lecture. And I would like to welcome our guest, Dr. Matthew Adams, who is the director of the W.F. Albright Institute of Archaeological Research in Jerusalem, and our special guest this evening. And I'm going to hand it over to Matt, and then once we're done, we'll have some time on the end for some Q&A if anybody has any questions.
Wow.
So thanks for coming, Matt. We appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for inviting me. I'm really happy to be here to talk to you guys in this intimate setting, even though we're so far away. Not too far. I'm in Tucson, Arizona, not Jerusalem at the moment. So I think we're still seeing the same sunlight. And I'm happy to talk about our excavations at LEGIO. As you'll see, we've done 4 seasons of excavation now, and we're prepping for another season this May. And you're all welcome to join us and bring your families. I'll link our website at the end so you can check it out if it's of interest. And if I did my job, then I sold you on it during the course of the lecture. So here I've kind of tricked you all into coming by putting the word Armageddon in the title. It works every time. So let's go ahead and talk about Armageddon for a moment. And it'll take some time, but I hope by the end of the lecture, you'll have some idea why I put Armageddon in the title, more than just as an advertising gimmick. Here we go. Armageddon is mentioned only one time in ancient texts in the Bible, the book of Revelation 16, verse 16. Here's the relevant passage for you, and I will read it in my best Bible voice of the day. The 6th angel poured his bowl on the great river Euphrates, and its water was dried up in order to prepare the way for the kings from the east. And I saw 3 foul spirits like frogs coming from the mouth of the dragon, from the mouth of the beast, and the mouth of the false prophet. These are demonic spirits performing signs who go abroad to the kings of the whole world to assemble them for battle on the great day of God the Almighty. And they assembled them at a place that in Hebrew is called Armageddon. This is, as I said, a word that is used only one time, Armageddon. It's actually, as you know, the New Testament and the book of Revelation are written in Greek, but this is not Greek. This is a corruption of Hebrew, which means, here we go. In Hebrew, it's Har Megiddo, the hill of Megiddo. And so this John, our revelator, has somehow placed this apocalyptic battle, which is essentially the penultimate battle of good versus evil, at a place called Megiddo. And then he doesn't really come back to it. So we don't really know what he means by this location or why this location is connected to this particular event. But we do know where Megiddo is. Megiddo is very well known from excavations and textual work, and also from the Old Testament as well. It's been very well known. It's one of the most excavated sites in all of the Levant. Here you see it on the right-hand side, marked out for you. For those of you who've been to Israel, I hope you've been to Megiddo. It's near the modern city of Afula, not far from Haifa, about an hour and a half north of Jerusalem or Tel Aviv. As we zoom in here, we can see its geographical setting. It's here in the middle of the Jezreel Valley, which is a very important geographical place as well. You can see that it's a large valley, and you can see also by the roads in this map that it's a place where roads from a variety of different places all kind of converge. Excuse me. So if we zoom in again, here I have another slide for you. On the left-hand side in particular, the yellow is highlighting one of the most active highways in the Levant, sometimes called the Via Maris in later Roman sources, but essentially a superhighway connecting Egypt to the northern Levant and Mesopotamia beyond. But this is just one example of how all of these roads converge. From Megiddo, you can get to any other part of the local topography, whether it's the Central Highlands in Jerusalem, the coastal plain beyond to Egypt, the northern coastal plain in Phoenicia, or the highlands of Galilee. So this probably explains why the site of Megiddo, which you're about to see in just a moment, is a very long-lived site. We have evidence of human activity at the site going back at least as far as 5000 BC, although their new excavations have revealed some Neolithic levels in nearby areas. So I think we can probably push that back to 8,000 BC, if not earlier. You only have to go about 2 kilometers away to start finding Paleolithic stuff, and even early hominids passing through this area many, many years ago. So probably this location kind of is the natural geographic center of things, especially people moving greater distances, attest to, or at least demonstrates what the archaeology does, this long-term history of the region. On your right-hand side, you see a map of what we call Greater Megiddo. Tel Megiddo is located right here in the center upper area, but this was really part of the site that was only occupied during the Neolithic through Iron Ages. After that, the city expanded to such a degree and historical circumstances changed that the site moved off of the Tel, and by the Roman and Byzantine period, all of this area here was occupied, if not a little bit more. Here we zoom into the Tel itself to take a nice look at it. I'm also involved in the excavations on the Tel itself. So if you're interested in Bronze Age and Iron Age archaeology, we can talk about that on another day. Today, we're going to be focusing on the Romans. The Tel itself has been excavated more or less continuously since 1992 by the Tel Aviv University excavations. Prior to that, there were extensive excavations in the 1920s and 30s. Arguably, Megiddo and its surrounding area have had the most dramatic impact on the development of biblical archaeology as a discipline. When you say the term early Bronze Age, middle Bronze Age, late Bronze Age, or Iron Age 1, Iron Age 2, all of these terms that are affiliated with chronology and the material culture that goes with it, all of that was basically developed at Megiddo in comparison to some of the other sites nearby. Okay, so let's zoom out a little bit here. We're now looking at Greater Megiddo and some of the sites that are connected to the Tel. We know from historical sources, especially Greek and Latin sources, that there were 3 other toponyms associated with Megiddo in the early centuries CE. One is a Jewish village named Kfar Odnai, which is mentioned in rabbinical sources. We have epigraphic and some literary sources that refer to the 6th Verata Legion and to some extent the 2nd Triana Legion, which was somehow stationed in this vicinity on this important road point, and Byzantine sources which mention the city called Maximianopolis, which was somehow located in this general area. It's only been until very recently, and in some cases our own excavations, that these toponyms have been able to be put on the ground, so to speak. One place name that has more or less endured for the last 2 millennia is Legio. Legio being Latin for legion. Also, we know it came to be the name of the town in this particular area already in the 2nd century CE, but we can trace through these textual sources how this name, this Latin word legio, gets transformed into Arabic lejeune. And El Lejeune is the name of the village that was here already in the 19th and 20th centuries, when we do have modern documentary evidence here. So from a place name point of view, we can really document the last 2,000 years just in the name itself. Enter my team here. We are a research project that we call ourselves the Jezreel Valley Regional Project. As a subset of that project, we do a number of different excavations. Legio is one of them, and probably one of the most important that we're working on now. You see selections of some of our volunteer teams over the last several years. And in the upper left, myself and 2 others, which I'd really like to mention. These are my co-directors, Susan Cohen and Yotam Tepper. The 3 of us have guided this project along since 2013. So a lot of things that I'm talking about today are the intellectual work of myself and my colleagues, but also the hard labor of all of these students that you see in the photographs below. Okay, so what we're really after today is the story of the Roman 6th Legion, which was one of our initial aims for the Jezreel Valley Regional Project fairly early on. We knew from these historical sources that it was somehow located somewhere within the Megiddo area and was essentially Megiddo during the the second and third centuries CE. But nobody knew where this was. We did have some clues, though. You're seeing some photographs from the early 20th century. This is the village of Lejeune. You can see in the two photographs on the right that there are columns being reused, as well as other architectural elements in the local village. On the bottom left, we see a few, bottom left, and then to the right of that, a Byzantine cross, which was on a stone found in the general Megiddo vicinity. And on the far left bottom, you see a row of columns that are still, some of which are still in situ, presumably being part of a columned road, which is much buried below. This is also in the area of the village of Lejeune of the early 20th century. In the upper left, you see a clipped version of a map, which was drawn by Gottlieb Schumacher. This was a fellow that came to the area in 1902 with the purpose of excavating at Tel Megiddo, which he did. But on his days off of excavating, he would wander around the area around Megiddo and map any archaeological features that were standing in the ground at the time. Now, this is a hugely important map for us because most of those things have long since been robbed away, covered, or otherwise destroyed. So in red on the map, you see some of the best attestation of archaeological remains that we have documented. Unfortunately, in most cases, he had short descriptions, but otherwise just used this kind of red color to indicate antiquities. So sometimes that's all we have to go on. Now, a few other clues that kind of cropped up over the last several decades. This hill, which appears as a plowed field in the middle of the image on the left, called El Menach. Several items have come out of this field over the years during farming activities. On the upper right, during the British Mandate period, this limestone statue of a lion was pulled out of the ground or pushed out of the ground by a plow. If you know anything about Roman funerary statues, you might recognize this as a typical style of mid-level to elite style tomb with a lion outside kind of guarding the tomb itself. In its paw, it has usually an orb or the head of some kind of gazelle or other thing. So this screams very clearly Roman upon first sight. On the bottom right, this photograph is let it be an example of about 4 or 5 of these items which were found during the construction of the road that you see going north to south here, or during other excavations nearby. This is a cooking pot, Roman style, 2nd, 3rd century for sure. And inside of it are the cremated remains of a long dead human individual. This cremation style in the cooking pots is also very typical of the Roman period, particularly in Roman legionary context. So this also is a very important clue for locating the base of the 6th Legion. Some other items that kind of help flesh out the picture are what you see in the image on the right on the bottom is the blurred out modern Megiddo prison, which was actually constructed during the British Mandate period in the 1930s as a local police station. And during those excavations, as you can see on the bottom left, some archaeological material was discovered. If you look in the far distance of that picture, you can see Tel Megiddo in the horizon, which is up here. So this photograph is looking through here up toward Tel Megiddo. These excavations were never published. We only discovered these photographs as we started digging through some of the archives of the Antiquities Authority in recent years. So this is very exciting. On the upper left is an item that was found during those excavations in the 1920s with a Hebrew inscription mentioning this fellow, Ephraim Bar Shimon. It's Hebrew, but it's written in a Samaritan style, which is actually very interesting because the rabbinic sources about Kfar Odnai, which we know is in this area, very clearly state that it was Samaritan Jews who were living in this particular village. So this is also a really great clue that brings together the name of the Jewish village with the other finds in the area. More recently, my colleague who you saw in the photograph before, Yotam Tepper, he, as part of his master's and then PhD thesis in the late 90s, early 2000s, carried out a large archaeological survey in this area. And in particular, he noted in the large field that we've already pointed to on a couple of occasions, and which my slide already tells you the mystery solved, the Roman legionary base, but we'll come to that. I should block that out next time as I'm going through this mystery. During his survey, he identified or picked up a lot of very classic Roman 2nd and 3rd century pottery, examples of Roman style water supply pipes, which were made out of ceramic and then put end to end, known at this point in time only in Roman military installations. And on the bottom right, a couple of examples of roof tiles, which in the 2nd century were almost exclusively used for Roman legionary activity. But these ones were great because they're actually stamped with the name of a legion. So if you're interested in archaeology and have heard lectures before, you probably know that it's not all that often that you get to a site and find the name of that site written on an inscription or other thing to help you figure out what it is. So that's fun and lucky. Now, going back to the Megiddo prison, after his survey work, Yotam also participated in, or he actually directed the excavations of an excavation inside of the Megiddo prison, which unfortunately was being carried out because the prison was being expanded. He worked for 2 years with cons who were in the slammer, so to speak, as his workers excavating the remains of what turned out to be several massive buildings as part of a large village. And you can see from my list here that the village provided some very, very interesting remains that showed that it was occupied in the 2nd and 3rd century. That's the period in which we're expecting the legion to be here. That there's evidence for Jewish activity, Samaritan activity, Christians, pagans, civilians, and Roman soldiers. But it wasn't the base itself, it was something else. Here are some of the finds from his excavations, and you can see on the upper left, I mean, this is not just a couple of buildings, this is a sprawling 2nd, 3rd century city. Some of the other items he found in the center, classic Roman household deity statues, the Lares. In the upper right and the bottom right, 2 very characteristically Jewish limestone vessels used in ritual activity. These 2 bread stamps, which bear the names of the centurion of one of the cohorts specifically attached to the 6th Roman Legion. So again, textual sources and so forth. Most impressive in some ways was the discovery of one particular building, and some of you may have seen this before. This is a building in which the mosaic on the floor was very well preserved, even if the walls of the building were not. And it is, let's see here. You can see on the right, this plan here, it's a large building that may have been a villa of some sort, a private building into which this mosaic was later put and perhaps given access to the general public. And we can tell this because of the inscriptions on the mosaic itself. There are 3 of them, as you can see. In the upper right, we learned quite a bit from these particular mosaics. In the upper right, remember Pramila, Kyriaka, and Dorothea, and moreover Crest. This is kind of surprising because it's a list of 4 women to whom this part of the mosaic is being dedicated. In the bottom left, Gaianus, also called Peripheus, centurion. Okay, so we have clearly a Roman officer here. Our brother has made the pavement as at his own expense as an act of liberality. Brutius has carried out the work. Okay, so we have a Roman officer who's paying money to have this part of the mosaic put in. Note it has this nice geometric design and these 2 fish in the center medallion. On the bottom right, the thing that really brings everything together and is maybe a little bit shocking, the God-loving Akeptus has offered the table to God Jesus Christ as a memorial. Now this shouldn't be here. This is, the date of this building is to the 3rd century. And here we have a clear reference to Jesus Christ and this limestone block in the center, which must be the table it's referring to. So it's some sort of building related to or dedicated to Jesus Christ. It has architectural elements which are being paid for by the Roman legion, or not the legion itself, but clearly a centurion. And he wasn't afraid about it. He was happy to put his name on it right next to this Jesus Christ character. So I think if you go back, say, 50 years in the history of Roman, in the history of scholarship of Roman history and early Christianity, you would probably think that in the 3rd century in particular, the Roman army should be killing Christians, not paying for them to have a beautiful hall, which is presumably for some sort of worship service. So this inscription is now one of the major pieces of evidence, which is rewriting the history of Christian persecution in this particular period. Again, this is a Christian building, which is probably dedicated to some sort of ritual activity. We know that early Christians, one of their central activities was eating a meal together. And here we have a table being dedicated. We know that Christian women, especially in domestic contexts, were very much connected to the early growth of the church. We have our women dedicated here, but the biggest surprise is the centurion. But this also, I mean, that's all very interesting and exciting, but it also serves as another clue that we're somehow getting closer and closer to the location of the Roman legionary base. And all of these things come together in this map and other things I haven't even talked about to really suggest to us, and in fact, Yotam was one of the first to suggest that this particular field outlined in yellow might be the location of the lost legionary base. Now, what does one of these things look like? If our excavation project is setting out, we've surveyed all of the evidence so far, and we're going to put an X on a map and try to find a legionary base, what does it look like? Well, we're very fortunate that they all, or a large group of them, all look very similar. And here you see some great examples here. Many of these have been excavated in the Western Roman Empire to date, except for what you're about to see. None of them have been excavated in the Eastern Roman Empire. But the full-scale legionary base, and that's what we're talking about here, accommodating roughly 5,000 soldiers, plus or minus, plus auxiliaries and so forth, looked like this on your left-hand side. The example from Novazium in Germany is a pretty good one. It's rectangular in shape. It's surrounded by a wall, and outside of that wall is usually a moat or series of moats. Not the kind of medieval moat with water and crocodiles really, but more like depressions, which could have sharp sticks and other kind of booby traps inside of it for defense. Within the walls, you see that we have an orthogonal grid-like pattern that's based on 2 main streets. One goes through the long axis here. The other runs about 1/3 of the way through one side and crosses all the way in this direction. Both of these streets might be compared to the Cardo and Decumanus of a normal Roman style city plan you might be familiar with. At the intersection is a large building marked with a 1 here, which is called the Principia, and it would be the main headquarters building of the Legion. And we'll come back to that in a little bit more detail a little bit later. Next to the Principia, number 13 is usually the commander's residence. And everything else is, I don't know, 80% barracks. All of these repeating buildings here are barracks rooms. And then other places like grain storage, hospitals, and other facilities that the army might need.
Mm-hmm. Well, barracks are kind of like that, aren't they?
Yeah. So you can see in the other examples here, in Navona and Carnuntum, that they all kind of have the same basic properties. So we more or less knew what we're looking for. Here's an aerial image before our excavation work. And I think, especially now that we come back to this image after all we know now, I think, well, at least I can. Can you guys see the legionary base now? It's there. It doesn't take much enhancement, but you can already start to see some long linear features appearing shadows, one here, maybe some lighter areas here, maybe something here, a linear feature here. There's a big rectangle right here. Let me back up for a moment because I should mention something about scale. This example here, note the scale at the bottom. We're talking about a big thing. This is essentially a city. Often sometimes more, 300 or more meters in this direction and 400 or more meters in this direction. So quite large. So back to this image. One of the first, some of the first activities that we carried out and we continue to use today are various types of remote sensing technologies, airborne LiDAR, aerial photography, GPR, ground penetrating radar, thermal imagery, and so forth. And those are some of the first things that we did. I have a slide for that. We've used all sorts of drones with all sorts of sensors. We've mapped the place with all sorts of different technologies. In the upper right, you see our ground penetrating radar survey, dragging this radar and magnetometer across the site and measuring the feedback levels. In the bottom left, you see some of our more recent attempts to use thermal imagery, a camera that detects heat signatures in the ground. And you can start to see linear features popping up there. And on the right, this is the result of a multispectral camera, which is seeing wavelength reflected from the crops, which is usually wheat, which is usually wheat, and demonstrating the relative health of some individual plants versus others, which taken zoomed out can show underground features that might be interfering with the root growth of plants. On the left-hand side, you see a hillshade model created by LiDAR technology. That is a giant laser flown by an airplane or a drone that can sense very minute changes in topography, which we can accentuate and so forth. And here you see the large rectangle, I think fairly well, that you saw in that first image, as well as a number of other terraces, which are a little bit too rectangular shaped to have been natural. On your right-hand side, this is arguably then the simplest and most productive of the remote sensing technology that we've used. These are just drone flights, and even if we went back 100 years, people were doing this with cameras and balloons at very strategic points in the growth cycle of the barley. And you can see in these two different images, different kinds of subsurface walls are a little bit more obvious. So we've done hundreds of these kinds of flights and put together all of these maps and tried to trace and examine walls that could be seen in some parts a year versus others in order to put together a more comprehensive plan. Now, the easiest to see with your own eyes right now is the image on your left-hand side. These are the data from our ground penetrating radar survey. It's only about 40% complete. We do a little bit more each year, but you can already see that there's lots and lots of stuff underground here. This particular summer, we're going to complete this rectangle and more if we can. But you can see the remains of streets, buildings, and so forth. Okay, so after doing some of these remote sensing studies, we're able to identify a couple areas where we wanted to do some actual excavation. In the first year, 2013, we excavated in Area A. I'll show you the results of that in just a moment. That was the easiest excavation I have ever done. We were able to say within the first day of excavation that yes, we found the base and we could reconstruct the entire thing just based on a few important key points that we found on that first day. We later in subsequent seasons, 15, 17, and 19, worked in Area B and C, which look far apart, but are actually working on two sides of the same building, that headquarters building I referred to earlier, the Principia. So let's go season by season. I'll show you some of the major finds and how we've put those together. Here we are in an aerial image at the end of the 2013 season, looking southward. The white building you see in the forest is the secret prison. So don't tell anybody I showed you an aerial image of it. You can see what we did. This was really just a 2-week test excavation to see if we can get some results that we can compare to some of the remote sensing stuff. You can see it's a linear line of squares that was designed to go kind of topographically from this low point. You see this ditch here, up the slope and toward the center of what we hoped was the base. Here is a wall that we came up with on the first day. You can see that it's just below the surface, like millimeters, literally. In fact, this is both good and bad. It's great that we're able to have results so quickly. It's bad because it tells us that the modern industrial farming that's been taking place in this field and continues to go on in this field has really destroyed a significant amount of the site that will never recover. In any case, two of these squares together identified this 7-meter wide wall, inside of which is this row of water supply pipes, just like the ones I showed you previously. These are ceramic, made in segments that could be fit together. Just down to the north of that, down slope from this wall, our squares came down upon what is clearly a man-made trench into the local bedrock, which is to be equated to one of these moats or fosses that typically surround the base. Some other things we find, probably the most abundant thing by far are roof tiles. Imagine all of these buildings in the base were covered with roof tiles manufactured by the legionaries themselves, and we just find them everywhere. Apparently, when the base was abandoned in the early to mid 4th century, the army systematically dismantled the entire base so nobody else could use it, which makes sense. But they just pushed all of the tiles from the roofs down. And so we usually have to excavate through 60, 70 centimeters up to a meter or more of just roof tiles that have fallen and cracked and broken. So that makes it a little bit difficult, but it does help us to easily identify walls of buildings versus the interior rooms. As I indicated earlier, we're also very happy that many of these, not many, it's actually a small number, but enough have given us the name of the legion itself. This was the one in the middle center was the first stamped roof tile that we found. And you can see that has LEG for Legio, which is supposed to be followed by the Roman numeral of the legion. Here, just the beginnings of a V. So it didn't quite give us the whole legion. But a few days later, we found the back half of one of these, which gave us the V, the I for 6, F, E, R, R on top of one another. Oh, and here's a drawing of one other one. So we clearly had the LEGIO VI, which is the legion that we knew historically was here. Some of the other tiles, I don't have an example for you now, included the name of the 2nd legion, which from historical sources we know is the first legion to show up here around 117 CE and probably only stuck around for a few years before being replaced. So it's nice to have an attestation of LEGIO II here as well. Here you see some other finds that really help to clinch the deal as if we needed them beyond the roof tiles stamped themselves. Some Roman armor scales in the upper right. Coins, we have tons and tons of coins, some of which have counter marks of the 6th Legion. That is a special mark that's added to a coin in certain circumstances. And in this case, it's marked with the name of the 6th Legion. On the left-hand side, you see the wide variety of oil lamps found at the site, many of them showing pagan themes, which is to be expected in a Roman legionary base. Center bottom is the leg of what is probably a 3-legged table carved with the head of this panther or lion or whatever it might be. There's a very nice parallel to this from Pompeii from the 2nd century. Toward the end of that first season of excavations, we were about to go home for the final day when one of our volunteers stumbled upon a piece of bedrock that had a stone leaning up against it. We didn't really think anything of it until we decided almost on a whim to move that stone aside. And lo and behold, that stone was hiding this man-made cave, which was filled with soil, but we worked through it. And after a couple of days, found that there was only one thing inside of it, this cooking pot, classic Roman 2nd, 3rd century, with a lid on it. And when we removed it and took it to the lab, indeed, we found the cremated remains of a human, which, as I have indicated earlier, is a pretty clear sign that you're dealing with the Roman army here. So as I said, this was one of the easiest 2 weeks of archaeology I've ever done, with the most results, and we were very happy about it. Good. So in future seasons, what we found in Area A during that 2013 season, the fragment of the wall, the big thick wall, which is the perimeter wall of the camp, the moats surrounding the camp, and many of the other fragments of structures inside, which must have been barracks, allowed us, along with the remote sensing technology, to pretty much reconstruct what the base was like, where the entrance and exits were, all according to the fact that most of these all look the same, the ones we know from the Western Empire. So areas B and C were very specifically intended to target where we believed the Principia, the headquarters building, was going to be. And I'll just say right now that we were totally right. So, haha. Okay, here you see one of our earlier reconstructions, which is very well done, showing you the Principia. Area B is focused on what we know is the back inside of the building, and Area C at the front. I'll explain what that means in just a moment. The information that we got also allowed us to reconstruct the size of the base. Here you see it, 485 meters by 325 meters, give or take a meter max, which is very nice to be able to do from just a few weeks of excavation. This is an artist reconstruction that we commissioned. Thank you, forgot the word. It is not accurate at all in terms of the diversity of buildings that we would expect to find inside the base, but within its setting and its size relative to the landscape, this is more or less what we have. Probably the buildings around the base were much more numerous and populous, and inside there would be other things besides the barracks that are just mirrored here for you. And at the center, you see the reconstruction of the Principia with its front gate, large courtyard, and rear components, which you'll be seeing in just a moment. Okay, so now if we put ours next to the Novasium example, I think you can get a good idea of how easy this was to reconstruct. One of the main streets that we talked about 1/3 of the way through, the axial street, both of which we have archaeological evidence for, and the Principia headquarters itself. The Principia building, we now know quite a bit about it. It's a huge compound that's 90 meters by 72 meters, fronted along the main street. Here are some examples from other places. In the upper left, this is the example from Novi, which is in Bulgaria, which has been excavated fairly well, especially in more recent decades. This is a reconstruction they did, and it's pretty typical with some exceptions of some of the others that we know. You see the example from Novasium in the center, but the one that parallels our structure the most is the one on the right from Lambesis in Algeria. And here we can just review part of the plan. The front of the building is here. This is the entrance. And here you're seeing the main street from which you would enter the Principia. You can see that it's a large open courtyard surrounded by a colonnade. And behind the colonnade are rows of rooms, the function of which is not 100% clear. They're suspected to be storage rooms for arms, but I'm sure they served a variety of storage purposes or possibly meeting purposes. On the opposite side of the open courtyard was a large stage platform from which the commander could address troops who were assembled in the center here, or other ritual activities may have taken place. If the army was going to go into battle and they needed to consult the augurs might stand on the platform with witnesses and observe that entire practice. On special holidays, the standards of the Legion might be paraded around and put on public display, maybe also in this area as well. In the back of the building, you see kind of one of the main components. It's actually a basilica turned sideways, if you can use your imagination, where we have 2 rows of columns, one here, with a central aisle. And on one side of the columns, you have the rear rooms here. And on the other side, it's kind of open to the stage and several other rooms off to the side as well. Again, we don't have a good sense of what all of these rooms were used for. There are many textual sources that give clues, but essentially this was the administrative and religious heart of the entire legion. So there was economic activity, administrative activity, meetings, all sorts of things here. One room that we do know a lot more about is this one marked a 1 in the center. This is the Sakellum. It is a religious shrine building. It often has this apse in the back. Sometimes it's a square shaped kind of thing. This is a place where the statues of the emperor would be placed and worshipped. Bronze statues, stone statues, maybe more precious metals. This is a place where the standards of the legion and the cohorts and others would have been stored. These objects, the eagle standard in particular of the legion, was one of the most sacred items for the entire legion, and it was worshipped as a cult object. And so this was where it lived. Interestingly, this room was also the location for the treasury of the legion, most often, as far as we can tell, in the form of a basement below this room, which was often accessed by stairs. In this case, you see just a piece of the staircase going down below, and the chests with all of the money of the legion, which also acted as a bank for the soldiers, would have been stored and secured in this particular area. So obviously the Principia is one of the most important buildings in the life of the base. Am I talking too much? How are we doing on time? Okay. What follows now are probably too many photographs showing you our excavations of the Principia. I'll try not to make it too confusing. And we'll probably cycle through a couple of them fairly rapidly if I find them redundant. So first of all, on the left-hand side, you see I've reoriented you with our 2 excavation areas. At the top is area B and the bottom is C, with our reconstructed drawing of the Principia itself, which I must say is probably fairly accurate because we got just enough pieces of data from our excavations and the buildings from other places to reconstruct this fairly well. Look at it side by side now with the Lambesis example. Area B, you can see, has
You're muted, Matt.
Am I back? Can you hear me?
Yep, you're back.
Okay, great. Here we are. Good. So area B excavated part of the Sakellum and several of the rooms in this corner over here. You'll see some of those in a minute. The area C focused on what we now know as the main gate into the Principia, some of the main street outside, and officers' homes across the street, which we won't see much of today. And in the corner, part of the storage rooms on the side and the colonnade and part of the interior courtyard. So let's look a little bit closer at the front of the building. You can see I've highlighted for you the route of the main street. Here is a more reconstructed format that matches what you've seen so far. And the main gate is here at the very intersection of these 2 buildings. Not a lot remains, but certainly plenty to show us the size and general character of the gate itself. You can see there's a threshold with some door emplacements here and the 2 jambs of the doorway itself. There's also a step leading up into the Principia from the outside, and you see the step here as well. Some underground drainage going beneath it and so forth. In front of that, evidence for a couple of columns. So it's probably a modest but not too disappointing gate. This is a famous gate from Jerash built by Hadrian, which is far, far, far larger than this would have been, but you can imagine this on a smaller scale is what this entranceway might have looked like. Some of the finds from this area are very nice. Some floral motif, probably part of some decoration. What this is still a matter of some discussion. This is a piece of statuary of some sort, but you see it has this kind of crazy hair-like look next to something else. One of our suggestions that this might be a theater mask. So if you imagine the happy and sad theater mask with kind of hair sticking out like that, we know that this was an element that was often used to decorate facades of gates, and that may be what this is here. Plus, we have a couple of fragments of inscriptions, which are not surprising to find set up outside of the gates. Good. Within the gate itself, we have some of the remains of the stylobate forming the colonnade around the inside. You can see how that functions here. And as we continued more recent excavations toward the corner of the building to mark the corner, the continuation of that stylobate for supporting the columns above it, as well as evidence of the subdivided rooms along the outside here. So all of this is plenty to give us some indication that we are dealing with a building that's very similar to the that Lambesis model here. Okay, so going back to our overall plan, let's move back to area B in the back. And zooming in here, as I said, we kind of did two different parts here. First, we did this corner early on, and then only our most recent season focused on the Sakellum here. So let's zoom in on this side. Here's an aerial image at the end of the 2019 season. Again, showing you how close below the surface everything is. But what you may or may not get from this particular image, but maybe some of the later ones, is that some of these walls are actually preserved 2 meters high. So if you're in one of these rooms here, standing on the concrete floor that we eventually found, the surface is well above your head. So we do have a lot of really exciting remains and can make a very clear plan out of what we have. Here you see some close-ups of this particular area. Let's look a little bit closer. Here's one of the rooms in the far back corner, which has this really beautiful concrete floor. The walls are plastered. There are 2 of these kind of standing blocks here. One is here and the other one we later found off image here, possibly for supporting statues. And in fact, as you can see on the left-hand side, we did find examples of statuary here, both stone and stone and bronze. This one is quite possibly the likeness of Trajan, which is very nice to see. We know that he continued to receive cultic worship even into succeeding reigns, especially the reign of Hadrian. The reign of Hadrian being the earliest period in which this base was probably built. You can also see in the back wall is this kind of arched niche that is carved out of the wall and also paved with plaster, possibly also a niche for a statue of some sort. We also found this crazy thing, which as far as we know is unique. We've published it. I think there's, no, I don't have it here, but if you're really interested in this, we have a publication on that you can ask me about. It's a column on top of a stone base. It stands about a little under chest height if you're standing next to it. The bottom is has this beautiful inlay of bitumen and white marble. The bitumen we think we can trace to somewhere near El Rasas in Jordan, so not too far away, but still coming from a distance and being used. We suspect that these were probably part of some other design originally and only reused in this particular thing, whatever it is, because you can see that it's been cut off at the bottom to fit onto the stone. There's nothing on the top of the pillar itself, which suggests that the pillar itself was kind of the main thing. It didn't hold up anything. There wasn't an emplacement on the top that you might expect if there was a statue was supposed to sit on top of it and so forth. So we have speculated, I think with pretty good argument, that this might be the remains of a beetle, that is a standing stone that is well known from Nabatean cult worship, and we know infiltrated in various ways into the Eastern Roman army. And we also, for example, have names of Nabateans attested in the legionary lists from this particular legion. So you might compare this, if you're into biblical stuff, to the standing stone worship of the Canaanites, the Matzevot, and that sort of thing. What we eventually found is that we were able to find a few others, at least in concept, even if they didn't have the same design, In Roman legionary base Principia, in at least 3 other locations, standing stones like this, which were often, I don't have a picture of it here, often set up inside the back rooms of the Principia or in the courtyard next to water features. And indeed, this one was sitting right next to a curious water basin, which was fed by an iron pipe. So possibly it was for religious activity of some sort. We propose Nabatean influence, but it'd be nice to get a few others, especially one that has some sort of graffiti on it that tells us what it's for. Also fun from the back rooms of the Principia is this latrine that you see in the center here. As far as I know, this is the only latrine that has ever been found in a Roman legionary Principia, so that's why we're cool. You can see that you're looking down into the sewer, you're missing the cover, which is wide enough to probably have been a double seater like this example here, so that's fun. The tiles in the latrine itself also had LEGIO VI imprinted on them, which is kind of nice. And it had this not totally unique, but nice feature here, which is probably some kind of flushing unit, a piece of pipe that you can pour water down to kind of keep the sewer flowing. Okay, we are almost done here. Let's go over to the Sakellum for a moment. Here, so in area B, zooming in even farther. Not a lot preserved, unfortunately, but enough to give us some good indications of what's going on. We know there are at least 2 phases here. Part of the room was paved with this nice stone. The rear part, this dashed line is supposed to mean that it's reconstructed, but in fact, we have this wall here. And so we know that there is this kind of outward projection of the Principia into the street behind it, basically, which is not abnormal at all. Usually, like an lambesis, it's an apse. But here we also have an apse. At some point, probably secondarily, within this rectangle, they built an apse type shape, which focused on this piece of bedrock that remained in place. After quarrying out to build the flat level of the Principia, they left this piece of rock, presumably to be an altar for a statue of the emperor, or some, maybe the eagle of the legion. We don't exactly know. Okay, just some other examples to show you that ours is similar and correct. Here's another example from Pompeii of a feature of an altar which is built into the back of an apse in a shrine. That's just for fun reference. Some of the finds from the Sakellum, we have a few inscriptions, which are nice, not very complete, unfortunately. Plenty of fragments of statuary, including bronze fingers and toes and other fragments, which we're working on conserving and reconstructing now. Here's a piece of hair head from a stone statue. Gold leaf, that's pretty cool. You got to admit, we don't find a lot of gold in excavation, despite what people think. Gold leaf, it was on something. We'd like to think that it might have been on the eagle of the 6th, but we'll probably never know that for sure. It's a very small fragment. And on the left, this is pretty cool. This is a large key. And you'll recall that I told you that one of the functions of the Sakellum was for the big treasure chest holding all the coin of the legion. Maybe this was the key that opened it. Probably the guy who was in charge of taking the treasure chest to the next location forgot the key, and he probably got in big trouble. But a couple other things, this nice piece of eagle, which was probably some sort of architectural element. You might imagine it, say, over kind of as a keystone in an arch, maybe in some part of the building. And this really bonkers thing, and if any of you know anything about stuff like this, I would love to hear what you might think it is. This is an architectural block. We suspected it might even have been a piece of the ceiling in the Sakellum, but that's a little bit speculative. And it has this nice frame. It's more or less square. And inside the frame is this curious shape that's more or less a rhombus or a diamond, in which each of the points is kind of has this horn feature taken out of it. We assume that this side is symmetrical. At the center is just this fragment of thing which we presume is part of a rosette. And we would love to have some parallels for this if anybody has seen something like this before. Okay, which brings us back to Armageddon. So maybe I did, maybe I didn't give you enough information to speculate on the connection between Megiddo and Armageddon, but I like to think that I did. If you take the book of Revelation and you try to strip away some of the crazy stuff in it, all of the theology, you're not left with a lot, but you are left with a few reoccurring themes. Rebellion against Rome. Essentially, that's what all of the real world historical components of the book of Revelation are about. You know, the whore of Babylon. Babylon is Rome. Several of the numbers and figures are associated with Rome. So it's a revolutionary text before it gets layered with certain amounts of theology. And some of the key events that happen in the book are ultimately the destruction of Babylon, the destruction of Rome. And before that, before the conquest of, for the ridding of Rome and the recovery of Jerusalem, which is inherent in this text as well, we have a battle taking place at Armageddon. And we can fit this in at Megiddo, I should say. We can fit this into the historical situation of the 2nd and 3rd century very nicely in a strategic, rebellious sort of way. So if you imagine the Jewish population in Judea or Syria, Palestine, and they hate being under the Romans. We know that they revolted on several occasions, the famous Great Revolt, the Bar Kokhba Revolt, and a couple of other things in between. They really wanted to kick the Romans out and recover Jerusalem for Judeans. From a strategic point of view, the Roman occupation of this area was held by 2 legions. The 10th Legion in Jerusalem, which would be the final battle that any rebellious army would need to do. And before that, the secondary legion in the area, the 6th at Legio. So from a purely practical standpoint, if you are planning a rebellion against Rome or even just hoping for it, you have 2 major battles to fight. One, wherever the 6th Legion is, and the final battle in Jerusalem to destroy the 10th Legion. Only then could Judea be Judean or Jewish again. So we believe that Armageddon is very much a reference to the base of the 6th Legion here. We know already by the Common Era that the place name of Megiddo had already disassociated itself with the actual Tel, the Bronze Age site, but it was still floating around. For example, some of the later biblical texts talk about the Valley of Megiddo. They're talking about the Jezreel Valley, but the name Megiddo is associated now with the valley and not a specific place. We also get reference to the waters of Megiddo, which also show that the name of Megiddo is migrated to the general area, not to the Tel itself. So if Armageddon comes, I suppose they're coming for the 6th Legion. And you can join us for Armageddon if you'd like. We will be there in May of 22, just a few months away. We accept volunteers of all types, all ages, all backgrounds. This year, we're going to be focusing just outside of the Legionary base itself on this particular hill, where a salvage excavation we carried out a few months ago revealed the location of the Legionary cemetery. We've already excavated 7 interment burials and 3 cremations there. We have 1 inscription. I don't have a photo of it for you now. A tombstone of one fellow, a miles, that is a common foot soldier, named Titus Aurelius Appius. That's now been published. You can check it out if you want. And we're really excited that this summer, much of this undisturbed cemetery will be very much accessible to us. In addition to the excavation, we're doing a lot of really exciting studies with DNA, with isotope analysis to try to find out where these soldiers came from. Where were they recruited from? Did they grow up in Britain? Did they grow up in Spain? Did they come from the eastern provinces? and so forth. So it promises to be a really exciting new window into the composition of the Roman army, particularly the 6th Legion. Thanks. Happy to talk about questions, whatever you got.
Well, I just want to say, wow, thank you so much, Dr. Adams and Matthew, for all of that. That was wonderful. Y'all found some beautiful pieces, even though they were fragmentary, just incredible. It's insane what y'all were able to find out. And oh my gosh, that first dig that you guys went on, I like to call those juicy digs. Like you were on the money. That is so unusual. Wow, that the whole thing just sounds so incredible. Thank you so much for sharing. And does anyone else have any questions for Matt?
I do. Hello?
Who said I do?
Question about the little scales y'all found.
Which thing? I couldn't quite hear you. Just say it again.
Question about those little scales you found.
Oh, the scales, yeah.
Like how big were they? Size?
This size.
Dang. Okay, that's a lot bigger than I thought.
Yeah, they're nice size. If you took the trouble to stitch them all together, it'd be a nice piece of armor.
Did you find those near the officers' quarters?
Those were actually found in that first area A, inside what we presume was one of the barracks.
That's really interesting because theory is like the scale armor is usually worn by officers, not too much the common legionnaire, but found in the barracks amongst regular military.
Yeah, I mean, things as small as these scales, they're the kinds of things that kind of can be very easily mixed up across the site just with normal wear and tear of the site over a couple thousand years. So I wouldn't put too much emphasis on the exact find spot of those other than they come from the base itself. That said, there's also, at the end of the barracks building was the residence of the centurion, who is an officer. And I couldn't tell you now if the small fragments of rooms that we did excavate were part of that or part of the rest of the barracks.
Okay. Any type of animal remains found at all?
Sorry, say again, a little bit hard to hear.
I'm sorry, phone's not really great for this. Animal remains like bones.
Oh yes, actually. Not really inside of the buildings itself. In fact, I showed you most of the artifacts that we have, except for fragments of pottery. All the animal bones that we have found, or 90% of them, came from our excavations in a couple of locations in the sewers themselves, particularly under the latrine. So the sewers, of course, is places where all the garbage ends up either intentionally or unintentionally anyway. So they're really rich find spots in a situation like this. So we know they're eating a lot of pig, which is probably not surprising, young pig. But we also found some really interesting ritual deposits in the cemetery during our salvage excavation, including a pile of pig mandibles. And as you may or may not know, pig sacrifice, at least according to Cicero and others, is often associated with funeral sacrifices in Rome, to Romans anyway.
Yeah, this upcoming excavation sounds really exciting. Cemetery excavations and all the DNA analysis you'll be able to do. Hopefully you'll find some nice strands in your samples after the cremations and everything. But yeah, that'll be a great dig.
Yeah, it's going to be fun.
On
on this project, if we can't make it out to you, is there any way we can, or other ways that we can be supportive, maybe give towards the project? Is there anything else that we can do on this end to help just carry it out?
Yeah, absolutely. Not to be crass, but money also is one of the most important things that we have to find in order to carry out these excavations. So we're always excavating for money. There is a place on our website, Jezreel Valley Regional Project.com, it was at the end, or there's an abbreviated version, jvrp.org, which you can go to. We would appreciate, of course, anything that you could send. You can also support us just by following our social media. We have a YouTube channel with some kind of cool videos on it now, not a whole lot, but we're growing that collection. In fact, we have now a 45-minute documentary, which we did during our 2019 season, embedding a filmmaker in the excavation. You can watch 2 weeks of excavation on YouTube. It's really interesting, and you'll feel like you're on the dig. But just liking and subscribing to that just helps build our audience, which helps build our donor base as well.
Yeah, definitely. That sounds awesome.
Yeah. How often do y'all dig every summer? And do y'all do in the normal 2-week stints, or do you guys normally go for longer than that? Or how does that work for you guys?
Okay, good question. So because, well, we'll give you the history. So pre-pandemic, of course, there's always the caveat of the pandemic. We alternated every other year, LEGIO one season, and then on the tail of Megiddo, Bronze and Iron Age in the other seasons. This year, we are doing LEGIO in May and Tel Megiddo in July. So we're doing both. I'm not sure how that pattern will resolve itself next year, but at least one of them will also go next year. And then we'll probably get back to the normal pattern after that. Our excavation season this year is 4 weeks at LEGIO and 4 weeks at Megiddo. You can come for however long you'd like, though. We have some people who just come for a week, some come for 2 or 3, or the whole season. Just whatever you can get away from to go and dig in the dirt.
That's awesome. Great. And I'm sure that all the cost information and everything like that is on the Jezreel Valley Project.org website.
Yeah, everything's there, including the application page. You can also, of course, email me directly. Any emails on the website links come directly to me. I handle all the volunteer interactions myself. So you can easily get a hold of me.
Sweet. And something I always ask our guests too is, do you have any published works or books or journal articles are out there or something like that we can purchase to make you rich and famous or read more about what you've been working on?
Yeah, we have quite a number of publications. Most of those are all listed on the website as well. As you can see from the name, the Jezreel Valley Regional Project, and I said earlier, is a number of different projects. So when you get to the main page, you click on LEGIO or others. By all means, look at all the stuff we're doing. But if you go to the LEGIO sub pages, you'll find a bibliography there. I think it's more or less updated. It might not have our most recent publication of that funerary inscription I was just talking about, which is really, really, really exciting because it's a complete inscription, the first complete one from LEGIO, but it's really simple. It's just the name of the soldier and his rank, which is just foot soldier. But what we were able to do with it is not treat it like a piece of epigraphy in the sense that we were interested in the language, which of course we were. We did all the normal stuff, but we also did a metrological study of the inscription. That means we studied the measurement and layout of the text, and we're able to demonstrate that even this simple soldier had access to really high-level craftsmen who were creating these things. And we could see the specific ways and units of measurement that the stonemason crafted how the letters were going to appear on the inscription, which you don't get just by looking at it until you start to take the measurements. So if that's not on the website, as I said, you may please feel free to email me directly. I will send you copies of whatever you can't get on your own by PDF, no problem.
Sweet. Thank you.
Yeah.
And then just personal question, because I'm curious. Will you also be analyzing the remains that you find, should you find any, because the whole cremation thing, but looking for diseases or injury or anything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mentioned all this kind of high level analysis, but we also do the more traditional things. We have a physical anthropologist as part of the team who's there to study the bones right as they're uncovered. Unfortunately, the full skeletons that we have found, well, some of them have been in good condition, others have not been in good condition at all. So there's much more limited information, but we try to get age, sex, any paleopathologies, illnesses that are reflected in the bones or teeth documented right there in the ground.
Nice. Any females been found on the site in the cemetery? It would surprise me if there were, but
no, not that we know of. That said, a couple of the skeletons are indeterminate, and the cremations are for the most part indeterminate as well, unless we're really lucky that one particular part of the most important bone just didn't singe all the way. We can sometimes get sex from those, but it's very rare. But from what we think we know about Roman legionary cemeteries, it might be possible to find women, especially if soldiers' families, especially in later periods in the 3rd century, could possibly be buried together.
Yeah, that's the only way I would think of there being any females in the cemetery, if it was somebody's wife or something.
Right.
Well, that's really interesting. Thank you.
Welcome.
I was going to ask at the very start about when you said that the Legio and the name essentially came into the Legion, and I immediately thought, well, wouldn't that be an interesting thing for Camp Lejeune, right?
Yeah.
But it turns out it's named after some guy.
Oh, is it? I didn't know that.
Yeah, I was wondering. That would be good to know. My dad actually got trained there, so interesting.
Oh, cool. Yeah, this Legio isn't the only one that this name phenomenon occurred at. There's one in Europe, I can't remember. In France, I think, comes into modern Lyon, not the famous city Lyon, although that does come from a Roman derivation as well. But in Jordan, a former legionary base is still known as the village of Lejeune today.
Dr. Adams, the videos that you were referring to, the documentary, are they available as a link through the jvrp.org website? Or is it a YouTube channel to subscribe to, or I can find it through the main website that you have on the screen?
Both of those are true. So they live on YouTube on the Jezreel Valley Regional Project channel.
Okay.
But they're also embedded into the website, so you can easily find them there. There's the documentary, and then there's a nice little trailer that we put together for it. It's pretty impressive.
Nice. Look forward to watching
the way it turned out.
Right. It's actually exciting to hear that you do have your dig that's planned in May and it's going forward. Have you guys experienced just unkind people over there that are, that's not the right word to phrase it, that are not cooperative? Because I know you got to get everybody to sign off, everybody to play nicely, to even do your own digs. How is the environment now coming out of the pandemic with all the whole political brouhaha? How has that impacted you guys?
Not at all, I'm happy to say.
Nice.
Israel is very welcoming for excavation projects to come back and get started again. Of course, Israeli projects as well as foreign projects. There aren't a whole lot of non-Israeli projects that have been running for the last few years anyway, but we've had no problem at all. In fact, I think they're so happy for archaeology to be happening again that the process is much easier than usual to get our license.
Nice.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, you're excavating next to that prison site, like, oh geez, they're gonna shoot down.
Yeah, we've never had a problem with the prison, believe it or not. But we are always worried when something weird happens at the site. We're always like, oh, it's the Israeli prison people are doing something. They're, when a camera doesn't work, or one time we crashed a drone and we thought it was being, shot down or zapped by the prison authorities, but I'm sure it wasn't. But this is always in our mind. It's a maximum security prison. It's where a lot of the bad or maybe not, depending on your view, Palestinian captives are kept.
Wow.
And then I heard too that there was an Air Force base not too far from, no, not their version of the Air Force, from not too far from the Megiddo site as well. I'm not sure if that's true or not. I never saw it, but
yeah, one of the main Air Force bases in the country is located just across the valley. So often while we're digging, we'll see F-16s and all kinds of awesome planes like flying overhead and buzzing us almost. So it's kind of fun, but it doesn't create any problems for us in our work. But it's the kind of high level base where if the Israelis are going to bomb something in Syria or even Iraq, they're going to take off from this base.
Right.
Wow.
So when we hear the planes go, we're always wondering what's going on.
Yeah. Wow.
A question about those coins y'all found. How big are they?
There are a variety of sizes. I would say the most common is something like that, like a nickel or a quarter American coinage. Sometimes they get a little bit bigger, but not really. For the 2nd and 3rd century, there are some really tiny ones that pop up in the 1st and 2nd centuries. They're often called widow's mites, made of bronze, and they're like the size of your fingernail.
Wow. Wow.
So those remains you found, they were in this hole that someone dug. Like, is that usual for someone to do that? For someone to bury?
You mean the cave burial? Is that what you're asking about? Let me go back to that.
yeah, I think he's referring to the cave burial where y'all on the whim moved the stone and found the urn.
No, I wouldn't say it's normal for a couple of reasons. One, it's actually inside the base, which shouldn't be. You shouldn't be allowed to bury yourself inside the base. So either this soldier presumably was buried after the base was abandoned. We had, just for fun, called him the last soldier of Legio. Because as I said, the base was abandoned and the Legion was redeployed to Arabia on a smaller scale. So probably people were left behind anyway. But the more I think about it, and we should probably revisit this area. As you saw in that 2013 season, we were just doing a narrow trench just to get a sense of things. So our horizontal exposure leaves something to be desired. But I get the impression that this cave was dug from one of the rooms in the barracks. And as I said, it had intentionally a stone put up against it. I wonder if somebody did this, illicitly, while the army was there and they just wanted to keep their best friend kind of nearby. I don't know, that's really speculative, I know, but just in the absence of other ideas, it seems possible.
Plausible theory.
Yeah, I always tell the kids that are coming to do we have a mock archaeological kids dig activity you can do at the museum. And I always tell them, being an archaeologist, guys, is like putting together a puzzle where not only do you not have all of the pieces, but you have to go and find the puzzle pieces spread out over a large area and try and piece it together. Yep. So we have to use our imagination, kids.
With or without knowing what the box looks like, right? The picture on the box.
Yeah, there's no picture on the box.
Yeah. Dr. Adams, I have a quick question, I guess, from a big perspective is, in all of your digs so far in your experience, has there been one or two most memorable, unexpected, or things you anticipated finding, or just moments that have just been really especially sweet in all your experience so far on any of these digs?
Yes, lots and lots of them, actually. It's more common than you think, especially if you're running an excavation where you're kind of responsible for a lot of things that are happening and not just a volunteer where you you hope that something happens in the place you're assigned. This burial is a great example. You know, it's the kind of thing that happened on the last day. And if you see on the bottom left, that's me in there getting dirty. And I don't do that anymore. Getting too old for that. So I jumped right in. I was really excited to do that. And I would say that happens periodically, at least once a season. A few years ago at Megiddo was a really dramatic one. We were excavating in a Middle Bronze Age layer in what seemed to be just a normal building, when all of a sudden kind of the dirt beneath us began to disappear into a crack below us somewhere. And of course, that was curious.
Oh, wow.
So as we cleared off some more of the dirt, we realized that this was indeed a crack in a stone structure underneath. And once we went on and went on, again, same example, this ended up being the very last day of the excavation. We moved one of the stones to find a completely intact, undisturbed Middle Bronze Age royal tomb.
Wow.
Wow.
With 3 individuals wearing everything: bronze anklets, gold headband, gold rings, ivory boxes, piles of pottery with what seemed like not much inside of them. But when we did chemical analysis, we found that the earliest example of the use of vanilla in the ancient world as a flavoring. All of this was just exactly one of those moments. And I could go on. There are several more.
That's unheard of. That's awesome.
Talk about buried treasure in the real sense. That is
totally. Wow. I've been very lucky. Not just me, my team and I, of course.
Right.
Yeah.
Wasn't there a theory, like, okay, I heard something like vanilla doesn't grow anywhere around there.
Correct.
Imported from China.
It comes from either deep in Africa, as in near Madagascar, if not Madagascar itself, which is of course a big source of it today, or from India. And it really, this discovery just totally upsets all of our perceptions about international trade during the Middle Bronze Age, so roughly, 1700 BC. And there's been a lot of evidence that there's trade around the Mediterranean, or at least the Eastern Mediterranean, and stuff coming from Afghanistan. We know that. But to suddenly have this new window, not because you discovered a new artifact that connected to someplace, but because you did a different, new kind of analysis to show that there were contacts with India somehow. Maybe not one boat going all the way back and forth, maybe down the line trade, I don't know. But it's just changes everything.
So that just opens up your mind, like more possibilities, like what other contexts did they make?
Absolutely.
I wonder what it tastes like.
Yeah, what we weren't able to figure out is what the vanilla was flavoring. Maybe it was a beer of some sort. We didn't get any good chemical reads on that. Just what was left or traces of this vanilla component. So it could have been wine, could have been beer.
Or maybe even like a perfume, maybe?
Possibly. Although it was, it was in a fairly small jar about this size, if I remember.
Oh, never mind.
Correctly.
I was thinking if it was in like an ivory box or something, maybe they were burning it like a perfume or an incense or something, like, I don't know.
But it was a smallish, medium pottery jar.
Okay.
Suggestive of food, I think.
Yeah, that a jar would be more suggestive of food than a box.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. All right. Well, does anyone else have any questions for Matt?
So many.
Where do we start, right? And how much time do you have?
I'm happy to talk some more if you have anything.
The question about the spearheads you found, were those arrowheads actually? I wasn't didn't see the picture too well.
Oh, there was one bronze spear looking thing. That was actually a just a knife, and that was found not by our excavations, but in near the Christian prayer hall excavations. So I actually, other than the picture, I don't really know much about it.
Is the environment can preserve a lot of metallic objects like iron or silver, or I guess definitely gold so far. That tiny little found.
Yeah, we actually, the Romans left behind quite a bit of metal objects for us, and many of them are well preserved. Iron objects typically get pretty corroded and require a lot of conservation work to kind of even figure out what they were. And sometimes it's not really possible, they're so corroded. Other types of metals like lead, gold, bronze, all are fairly well preserved. Those scales were bronze. Oh yes, we found, curiously, also in that first season of excavations, like a small cache, like in the corner of a room, these bun-shaped lead ingots, which are super heavy, by the way, but they're about this big, and they're kind of hemispherically shaped. So probably lead was being melted down, poured into the bottom of a cooking pot, and then the cooking pot broken. So they're just ingots to be used for, I don't know, whatever you want to make out of them later. Sometimes we find amulets and other things made of lead as well. In fact, we did a study, might be on the website, where we did a chemical analysis of just the general soil from Legio in comparison to a site nearby, which was only occupied in the Bronze Age. And we're able to show the significant amount of lead pollution at a Roman site. They were using so much lead that if you just test the soil anywhere in the world, you could probably guess, based on the amount of lead, whether Romans were hanging out there or not.
No wonder they died young.
Yeah.
Oh,
That
talk
and
about
wars.
lead poisoning and not even knowing you're getting it. Wow,
I know.
that's scary.
Yeah, they had the same problem in the Victorian era. They made all the children's toys out of lead and then wondered why most of them were dying as small children. It's because every child takes a toy and puts it immediately in their mouth,
Yeah.
and it's made out of lead
Lead.
and covered in lead paint. Like, oh,
You might hear about that story about the tomatoes. They thought they were poisonous because they ate them off these lead plates. Like tomato absorbs poison or something, and they eat it and they die.
Yeah.
yeah.
That makes sense.
I thought that was like such an odd coincidence.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
Well, guys, it's probably time that we release
Yes, sir.
Matt back to his family and let him go. But thank you, Matthew, so much. You have been a wonderful treasure trove of information tonight. I greatly enjoyed this lecture, and I appreciate all your work. I keep up with it, or at least I try to, every dig season, and you do great stuff. So thank you so much for giving us so much of your time. And we hope that we'll be able to have you back again someday for a virtual lecture, and we hope to be able to support you somehow
Yes.
through your Jezreel Valley projects, and who knows, some of us might even be able to go over there someday. So
Yeah, it'd be great to have you.
Color.
Yeah.
Thank you for
Thank
the
you.
taste. This is just a sweet taste of just makes us long for more. I know for me, but thank you, sir. Thank you, Dr. Adams. Thank you.
Yes,
You're
thank you.
welcome. You're welcome. Bye, everybody.
Good
Bye.
night. sir.
bye.
Good night.